Welcome back to Bible Basics with Annetta. Glad that you could join us in the continuation of the study of the Old Testament. Tonight we're going to be studying the Book of Ruth. This is a short book, but it is very insightful. It's a wonderful story, and it is also the beginnings of the Messianic family as we begin to see that develop through Ruth herself. We begin the book during the time of the Judges. Some speculate that it was written around the time of Gideon, but for whatever situation they might have been in, we find that Elimelech and Naomi were the mother and father-in-law of Ruth, and they left the promised land and went to Moab because of the famine. This was during a time whenever the children of Israel were in turmoil, and the hand and favor of God was not upon them, and there was famine in the land. So they went to Moab to seek refuge. Moab, the Moabites, were actually descendants of Lot, which was Abraham's nephew. So they were distantly related to the Jewish people, but still yet God had told them not to marry with the Moabitess people. But we find that Naomi and Elimelech's sons did just that. Both of them took daughters of the Moabs. One of them married Orpah, and the other married Ruth. Sadly, just a short time into the story, or into the book of Ruth, we find that Elimelech and both of his sons die, and that left Naomi as a widow along with both of her daughters-in-law. So Naomi had heard that the favor of God was back upon Israel, so she decided to go home to Bethlehem. And she started on her way, and her daughters-in-law wanted to go with her, but Ruth told them that, they were young, she couldn't produce more heirs to give them husbands, as was the custom and tradition at that time in the history of Israel. So she told them to go on back to their families, to go on back to their gods, because we know that the Moabites actually did worship a false god, and that god was the god, just a moment, let me look his name up, because I have forgotten it. It was Chesham, and he was actually a god that required human sacrifices, child sacrifices, which is slightly irrelevant at this point, but we find that Orpah, she decided to go back to her family, and she kissed Naomi goodbye, and she went on her way. But we find that Ruth wanted to stay with Naomi and to go back to Jerusalem with her. And this was probably the most significant verse in the book of Ruth, and I want to read it to you in chapter 1, verse 16. And this is after Naomi had told the daughters-in-law to leave her, and Ruth replied to her and said, But Ruth replied, Don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us. That's verses 16 and 17 in the first chapter of the book of Ruth. So Ruth was very serious. She wanted to go back with Naomi, and she wanted the God of the children of Israel to be her God as well. This kind of denotes that during the second covenant, the new covenant, when Jesus came, that he came not only for the Jews but also for the Gentiles, that we all have access to God through Jesus Christ, and at this time it shows that they too could convert to Judaism, even if they weren't born to Jewish parents. So we find that Ruth and Naomi went back to Bethlehem, and everyone was excited to see Naomi. She was very bitter because she had lost basically everything. She had lost her husband, she had lost her sons, but while they were there, they were obviously widows, and widows didn't have a very fair rap at that time. They usually were stricken with extreme poverty, but that's why God's law allowed for them to have a way of redemption, if you will, and it's called a kinsman redeemer. A kinsman redeemer would be the closest kin to those that passed away, and they would take their widow of a brother or cousin, the closest relative, to the one that was deceased, and they would take their wife as their wife, and they would have children. And the first child that they had, the first son, would be considered a child belonging to the deceased. So he would be raised as a child of the deceased. And this was the story of the kinsman redeemer. We find that they reached Bethlehem about the end of the barley harvest, and since they were poverty stricken, Ruth went out to the fields of Boaz, and she began to glean in the fields to have food for her and for Naomi to eat. Naomi encouraged this because Boaz was a closely related kin of theirs, and that's where we find the story goes on. Boaz actually looked on Ruth and saw that she was a very attractive young woman, and he told those that were in his fields, guarding his fields, to take special care of her, make sure that she was able to glean plentifully, and even to leave a few grains behind so that she could glean more, so she could take care of herself and Naomi. As the story goes on, she ends up going to Boaz and presenting herself to him, and he realizes that he can be her kinsman redeemer. However, there was another that was more closely related. So he had gone to the gate of the city in front of the elders that were there, and he had approached this man and told him that, Naomi and Ruth were back in the area, and that he wanted to be the kinsman redeemer, but that the other gentleman was actually more closely related, that he could actually receive the land that belonged to Elimelech, but in doing so, he also had to take on the responsibility of the widowed Ruth, and he wasn't willing to do that. So he actually made a contract with Boaz, and they didn't shake hands as we do oftentimes in our day and time, but they actually took off their sandals, and he swore to him, and by giving him a sandal, that was their contract, that was their proof that they had agreed to this arrangement. So Boaz took Ruth as his wife, and the first child that she bore, his name was Obed. Obed was given to Naomi, her mother-in-law, from her previous husband that had passed away, and Naomi actually raised Obed as her own, as a replacement for the children that she had lost. The interesting thing is Obed was the grandfather of Jesse, and Jesse was the father of King David. So we see that this begins the line of ancestry for Jesus, because Jesus came from the line of King David. So that's why we see this here. Ruth was actually the great grandmother of King David. It is believed that the book of Ruth was actually written during the time of King David, even though no one really knows who was the actual author of this book. Very short book, very interesting details. Um, but we do see that, it's kind of a type and shadow of the redeeming love of Jesus as he has for us. That even though we might not be of Jewish descent, he still came and he still loves us, and he wants to redeem us to be his own. And I'm very thankful for that. Thankful for you for watching and staying with me during this videoing process. I am sorry that we've been a little delayed over the last few videos. I've had some technical issues, but we've gotten those resolved, and we'll be posting more videos here just to kind of get us back on track. So have a blessed day, blessed evening, and we will see you soon.